Let's continue our study in the Gospel of John. We are now in John 19, verses 19 through 22, and this is about the signboard. The Apostle John uses 4 verses to tell us about the signboard and its writing that was placed on the cross. Who had it put there, what it said, how the Jewish leaders reacted, and what Pilate said to them. Chapter 19, verse 19. Now also Pilate wrote a notice and put it on the cross. Now it was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. It's very unlikely that Pilate himself wrote the notice, and it is certain that Pilate himself did not go there and put it on that cross. He ordered his subordinates to do it. Several times the Gospel of John will say that someone did something, but the reader understands perfectly well that subordinates or servants actually did it. Note, for example, John 19:39, that Nicodemus himself certainly did not carry 100 pounds of myrrh and aloe to the tomb. Pilate had his subordinates do that. In this way, Pilate gets to make one last insult to the Jewish leaders. Perhaps we could say he took revenge on them. He understood that having those words hung on the cross was a great insult to the Jewish leaders. But from heaven's point of view, it was a great proclamation in 3 different languages that Jesus is the King. This is the pinnacle of John's irony. Remember, irony is that a person says something and the reader knows that what that person says is far more true than the speaker knows. Pilate wrote, Jesus is the King of the Jews, and he really is the King of the Jews, something that Pilate really didn't have any idea about. The wording of the sign varies slightly in the different gospel accounts. In Matthew 27, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. In Mark 15, the King of the Jews. In Luke 23, this is the King of the Jews. And here in John 19, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Perhaps the full wording was actually, this is Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. And the 4 gospel writers felt that they did not have to mention the entire statement. Note, all 4 accounts give the core idea that he is King of the Jews. Chapter 19, verse 20. So, many of the Jews read this notice because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in the language of the Hebrews, in the language of the Greeks, and in the language of the Romans. All 4 Gospels tell of this notice, but only John and Luke record that it was written in 3 languages. Now this word Hebraisti indeed means in the language of the Hebrews, but it's a little more complicated than that. It can refer to Hebrew or Aramaic. In this context, because the Jews spoke Aramaic as their daily language since returning from Babylon, where Aramaic was spoken, this term almost certainly refers to the Aramaic language, and it's used 7 times in the entire New Testament. We've seen it in John 5:2, and then several times in chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 13, 17, and 20. Now it's also used, the only other place it's used is in Revelation 9:11 and Revelation 16:16. In the Gospel of John, it always seems to mean Aramaic, but in Revelation, it seems to mean Hebrew. The Greek here, it's really what we call Koine or Common Greek, which was a simplified version of the classical Greek used hundreds of years prior to this event by philosophers, for instance, like Plato. This was the language held in common in what was then the eastern end of the Roman Empire. Hellenized Jews would have spoken Greek. The language of the Romans, that's of course Latin, was the language of the Roman government. It was the legal language of the empire. Now, according to Carson, such notices were usually written in several languages to declare the transgressions of those who were crucified. And this was done so that people would understand the consequences of violating Roman laws. Chapter 19, verse 21. So the high priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that one said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Well, the Greek imperfect tense is used in the verb were saying, giving the impression that they were repeatedly saying. They were saying over and over again, to the high priest. This notice was a great insult, and they demanded that Pilate change it. None of the three synoptic gospels mention this response of the chief priests or high priests regarding this message, and the Gospel of John does not record the insults given by the soldiers and the chief priests, passers-by, and one of the robbers being crucified. John records this using the Greek perfect tense, gegrapha. Have written is how we translate it in English. But the use of the perfect tense implies that the writing is permanent, has ongoing consequences. It won't be changed. I have written this, and it's not going to change. The high priest cannot manipulate Pilate any further. And Pilate is sure that Caesar will not object to this little joke on the Jewish leaders. So, summary. In these 4 verses, we have learned about the signboard that was placed on the cross, who had it put there, what it said, how the Jewish leaders reacted, and what Pilate said to them. And again, that writing was very ironic. Pilate had it written as an insult. Here's your pathetic king. But in fact, it is true. He is the King of the Jews.